the man that needs no introduction across this great land, Dr. Ron Paul. Ron Paul Revolution. Ron Paul Revolution. Ron Paul Revolution.
Ron Paul Revolution.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for that nice reception. Thank you for the introduction and all the individuals that worked so hard to put this together. Now, you can't quite see my wife, but my wife Carol's with me today. She's holding some roses. We have one granddaughter. We have 18 grandchildren, and we have one granddaughter. I'm not going to tell you what university she goes to. But our oldest grandson graduated from OU, so I don't know how all his relatives that had graduated from a few of those technical schools kept talking to him and talking to him. No, OU. But anyway, it's really great to be here today. And it's great to be involved in something that's very important to you and obviously very important to me. And that is the cause of liberty. You know, the other night in the debate, they asked us to use one word, and I was so tempted because that's really the one word that is the best. The word is liberty. That's what made the country great, and that's what we're losing, and that's why we're not so great anymore, and that's why there's a revolution going on. But I'm sure glad the revolution has arrived in Oklahoma because it is spreading. It's an intellectual revolution, and it's not going to be stopped. And you know what, an idea whose time has come, it cannot be stopped by armies or any government. So we're really on a roll now as far as presenting our case and actually doing very well in the effort to accumulate delegates. You know, the name of the game. You know, sometimes they get confused on the voting and counting the votes, but so far right now they're admitting that we are in second place with delegate count. And there's a lot more counting to do, so the effort is going to continue, and it's so important. But this has been going on for a long time. I've been talking about our problems for a good while. Matter of fact, when I got involved in politics in the 1970s, I was trying to head off some of these problems. But lo and behold, the government continued to grow. If you looked at the size of government, and since I've been involved, you'd have to say, I didn't do a very good job, because the government keeps growing. But where we're making inroads is with you. And I tell the people wherever I go that the people are waking up, but Washington is still sound asleep, so we better let them hear our message. Our country was started on a good note, never perfect. We had a great constitution. It had its shortcomings. They gave us a republic, but quite frankly, I do not believe we live in a republic anymore. And what we have, though, is we have the tradition of the rule of law and the tradition of the republic, and we have the enthusiasm for it, but we have a long way to go to restore the republic. And that means that we have to deal with the many problems that have come about for a very precise reason. I claim that most of the reason, if not all the reason, why we're in this political and economic mess is we have sent too many or have allowed too many to go to Washington who either didn't read or didn't understand and didn't take their oath of office seriously like they should. But at least about 100 years ago, things changed rather drastically. The seeds were planted for the inevitable growth of big government, and that was, things like the 16th Amendment was a very bad move. And of course, we should repeal the 16th Amendment because,
as long as possible.
Because we have a natural, God-given right to our lives and our liberties, and we ought to have the right to keep the fruits of our labors. Jefferson lost the argument that the federal government should be able to borrow money. He believed they shouldn't even be permitted to borrow money. So he lost that argument. They started borrowing money, but not till the 20th century did they borrow money wholesale. But then, of course, then with the income tax, they started, taxing us wholesale. But there was always a limit to that, because there is a point of no return. The more you tax, the less revenues and the angrier the people become. So we had the taxes that were limited, and this borrowing was limited, because if you continued to borrow, the interest rates would go up. So, of course, in that same year, they gave us the IRS and the federal and the income tax. They gave us that very onerous thing called the Federal Reserve that we need to abolish. In the Fed.
In the Fed. Fed. In the Fed.
Of course, that was a guarantee that they would not end the Fed, but the Fed, would end the value of the dollar. And now, since the Fed has been in existence for 99 years, they've lost about 99% of the dollar's value from 1913. So in the next year is going to be an anniversary of sorts, a 100th year for the Federal Reserve. So we should celebrate by passing the bill that repeals the Federal Reserve Act. With the introduction of the Federal Reserve, which is something that nations have done and dictators have done for thousands of years, debase the currency. The governments always want control of the money because they can debase the currency. At one time it was just clipping coins, another time diluting the metal, at another time it started printing money. Today it's very sophisticated. They just use a computer, literally creating trillions of dollars without hardly any effort. And the Federal Reserve actually churned $15 trillion during the bailout. And they do it without adequate supervision by the Congress, like the Congress totally ignores them. And that is why, short of getting rid of the Federal Reserve, we absolutely have to get a full audit of the Federal Reserve. What they're doing. But history shows that once governments have the power to create money, they do. And what does that mean? That means the government grows. And when the government grows, your liberties are undermined. And that means personal liberties are undermined, economic liberties are undermined. And nations that grow like that end up doing way too much overseas. They feel like they have this obligation, authority, and the power to police the world. And so when we have our revolution and what comes to about, you'll know it's here when our troops come home. The other night I argued that they weren't listening to my moral and my constitutional arguments for not starting another war and bringing the troops home. But there's an economic argument that they must listen to because it's a powerful argument. It's great nations who overextend themselves overseas inevitably go bankrupt, and we're in the middle of the declaration of our bankruptcy now, and that is why there's such turmoils around the world, because we have been issuing the universal currency, the reserve currency of the world. So we have to face up to that. You know, I just saw a statistic just recently that showed that the amount of debt per individual in this country is greater than the amount of debt per individual in Greece. So that tells you how serious it is, but there's still a bit of trust in the dollars. We still print the money. They still take it overseas, and there's a lot of monetary mischief, and the central banks collude, and everybody has a stake in it because those who hold our dollars, even the Chinese, they're holding trillions of dollars. They have a stake at it because if there's a run on the dollar, they all suffer. But the market is more powerful than all governments. That is why the Bretton Woods, which was predicted to break down in 1971, did. That was the end of the gold standard. Because they didn't obey the rules of the gold standard, they kept printing the money. So the money supply grew, grew, and grew. They attacked the dollar, and finally that system broke apart. Of course, that was the year I got interested in politics because I thought that would definitely usher in an age, a bigger age of big government, and this is what we've had for 40 years. So for 40 years, we've had a dollar bubble, a bond bubble, living beyond our means, a government that has not stopped growing, overextending ourselves overseas, and obviously attacking our civil liberties at home, at the same time undermining the productive capacity of this country. We are not a productive nation. We're living on borrowed money. We still have apparent wealth around the country, but it doesn't match up to the debt that we've accumulated. So if the Keynesian liberal economists are right, they believe that all you have to do is spend money, don't save money, spend money, borrow money, and print money, and you get yourself out of a recession or depression. So it's obvious that it doesn't work, and there is a great test going on right now between those of us who believe in sound money and free markets and individual liberty, minding our own business, a sensible foreign policy, and those who believe we're supposed to be the policemen of the world and deficits don't matter and the welfare state will last forever. I believe we can win this argument, and we'll win it soon. Woo! Wherever I go, the crowds come out, and the people in this country know exactly what's going on. And in Washington, they put you down, and they think that they have to take care of you from cradle to grave, and all they're doing is giving you debt and a burden. I'll tell you where they're not waking up. In Washington, they're still sound asleep. They don't hear from us yet, but that is our job, to hear from us and let them get the message what we need in this country, and that's more liberty. You know, one thing that inevitably occurs as government grows, you can't grow government. The government assumes this responsibility to improve our behavior. If they think the government can protect us from against ourselves, it inevitably leads to a dictatorship and control of everything we do. Generally in this country, we accept the notion that our government's not supposed to interfere with our religious value. You know, arguing the case for our hereafter and our eternity is pretty precious for a lot of people, but the government's supposed to stay out of it. The government's supposed to stay out of the business of telling us what books to read. But why is it that we have been so complacent for 100 years, accepting the notion that the government can tell us every single thing that we can do with our own bodies? And that is what we have to reject. Woo! Now, the message of liberty is a wonderful message, and I'm always shocked over the many years that I've talked about this, how poorly we win the intellectual argument. We're doing better now, but for a long time, the other side who said that the government is obligated to take care of everybody. Anybody who needs anything has a right to it. So therefore, if they need something, want something, or demand something, and they have a coalition of 51%, they can take it from the 49% and get what they want. But see, that is coming to an end. And there's no reason in the world that our message can't, prevail. Because not only do we argue for the case for personal liberty, but if you have any humanitarian instincts and you care about the things the other side claims they care about, because they think that if you need a house, give them a free house. If they need food, give them food stamps. If they need an education, give them free education. If they need medical care, give them free education. Because they're the humanitarians. But what does it end up like? It ends up like the housing bubble. Sure, they passed out a lot of houses to people who couldn't afford them. They lost their jobs, they lost the houses, and somebody else made bundles of money off the deal. Ooh. Not only did they make money when the bubble was forming, when the bubble burst, they, of course, got the bailout. The American people got the bad debt. They lost a job. The middle class is now shrinking. So there's no reason why we can't win this argument now that the failure of government programs and government involvement overseas and policing the world, it is so apparent that it is failing, that if they truly care about their fellow man, the one thing is, there's absolute concrete evidence that the freer a society is, the wealthier the society is. The one thing, too, that is so wonderful about the message is it brings people together. And because we've chopped freedom into bits and pieces. You know, some will defend half of the economic issues or more of the economic issues. Somebody else will defend maybe civil liberties to some degree in the First Amendment. But they don't come together because we should bring it together. The issue is liberty. And if you bring liberty together and you have a natural right to it, you don't even ask what you're going to, the other people who accept the principle, you don't ask them, what are you going to do with your liberty? That's like saying, well, if you get a job and work, I'm not going to ask you how you're going to spend your money, but you're obligated to spend it wisely and take care of yourself, and you can't, depend on others if you don't do a good job. So in a free society, we should all come together, not because of how we're going to use our liberties, because some people misuse their liberty. But that doesn't mean that we have to accept that. Just because they misuse it or do things that we don't like, that doesn't mean we endorse what they do. What we have to do is endorse the principle of liberty, and we should all come together and use it as we see fit with a rule of don't hurt or injure anybody else. And that means that we should all come together, and the crowds that come together for the defense of liberty should be and have been very diverse, and that's how we solve so many of our problems. Too many others have assumed that our certain freedoms and privileges come because we belong to a particular group. I don't buy into that. I think it's absolutely wrong to have punished, as this country has punished certain groups because they were denied because they belong to that group. But the answer to it isn't giving people privileges because they belong to a group. Everything has to be individual, and we have to treat everybody equal. We have to have equal justice under the law for each and every individual. And I've had a lot of complaints. I think you all know that I'm not exactly a fan of the drug war. I think the drug war has cost us $3 or $4 trillion in the last 40 to 50 years. And guess what? There's still a lot of bad drugs out there. There's a lot of addictions. I don't like the idea of saying drug addiction is a crime. It should be treated as alcohol and treated as a disease. But the bigger problem in this country when it's misuse of drugs, believe it or not, it's prescription drugs are a bigger problem than the illegal drugs. But the drug war has been used to undermine our civil liberties. There's been too many SWAT teams busting into houses they shouldn't be busting into, too many people, innocent people dying, and it has been an excuse to invade our privacy. And this is the reason that we have to look at that whole issue of who's supposed to protect us against ourselves. We teach our children about the dangers, automobiles and fires and all the other things. We should have that responsibility as well. If I thought for a minute, though, that they had a perfect society and nobody was inclined to misuse drugs and do all the problems that come, it'd be a little harder. It's sort of like the economic argument. They don't create perfect economic conditions, but they don't create better moral behavior either. That comes from within the family and the community and the church, not from the federal government bearing down on us. But in the last 10 years, not only has our foreign policy gone astray, and we are involved now in about 900 bases, 130 countries, and we're in such a mess. But in the last 10 years, the attack on civil liberties have been atrocious. After 9/11, which was a horrible, horrible day, but I think they've misunderstood 9/11. I don't believe for a minute that we were attacked because we're free and prosperous. There's a lot more to it than that. But guess who was attacked immediately after? Yes, we went over in Afghanistan and got involved in wars that had nothing to do with 9/11, and it took 10 years to find that one ringleader and get rid of him. But guess who got the attack? It was the American people. The American people got attacked by the passage of that very onerous Patriot Act that needs repeal. I am convinced that if that bill had been called Repeal the Fourth Amendment Act, it wouldn't have passed. So when we get around to repealing it, we're not going to say that we're going to repeal the Patriot Act. We're going to say, restore the Fourth Amendment to this country. 'Cause 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 It's sad, but our attack on our liberties, the foreign policy, the monetary policy, and the welfare state, tragically, has been too much bipartisan. I'd like to say that the party that I'm running in is the savior and it's going to produce it, but that isn't going to be the answer because our problems have been bipartisan. Too long. Matter of fact, sometimes the people say, well, Ron, you can't do it because you won't compromise. Well, there's been way too much compromise in Washington between the two parties coming together, spending the money and going into these wars. So, but what else has happened? The president assumes that he's a king. He's decided that by eating, because he's the commander-in-chief, that he has the authority under certain circumstances that he can assassinate an American citizen. And he's done it to prove this point. He's done it 3 times. And where has been the outcry? I hear it from the crowds. But just think, we've had how many debates? It depends on how you count. I think it's about 22 if you count every single one of them. That issue never comes up. About civil liberties, the protection of privacy, assassinations, all these things, totally ignored. They do not bring this up at all. Though, but also the federal, the Congress hasn't done much good in stopping it. They don't resist what the president does. Matter of fact, in December, they delivered to the president the National Defense Authorization Act. The president celebrated the new year, January 1st. He signed the bill. And, of course, that is the bill that gives the president explicit authority that he can use the U.S. military to violate posse comitatus to arrest American citizens. In secret, put away in secret prisons, denied an attorney, and kept indefinitely. That is not what America should be all about. We need to change it. The number one issue that most people claim is the issue, and I believe it is a big issue, and that is the economy. The economy is very, very weak, and there's a claim that things are improving right now, but quite frankly, my own belief is that 6 months to a year, you're going to have people admitting that we're back in a recession because the statistics are superficial. They deny the truth. Even the calculation of unemployment is fiction. The real unemployment is closer to 20%. The real inflation rate, Bernanke says he can only steal 2% of your money per year, the value of your money, and he still thinks that's moral. But it's much more than that. The free market economists that use the old calculation of CPI, we're losing the value of our currency at 6%, and it's bound to get a lot worse. Just think of what's happening now with energy prices, and gasoline prices are going up. So that is a result of the inflation. A lot of people say, well, Bernanke will argue that, well, there's no inflation because he measures the CPI and then he fudges on the CPI. But the inflation is when they increase the money supply and distort the interest rate and distort the investments. And we have plenty of that. One of the consequences will be the prices going up. Educational costs going up, medical care costs going up, energy prices going up, housing prices going up, NASDAQ prices going up. Then they have to have a correction. So the real problem is this whole idea that you can do central economic planning by the Federal Reserve System. Just think about money. Money is 50% of every transaction because we measure everything. All our wages and prices, everything else, are measured by dollars, and they have total control over the dollars. But it's political control, it's special interest control, it protects the very wealthy, and a characteristic of the destruction of money. When governments come in and dilute the value of money, it inevitably takes wealth from the middle class and moves it to the wealthy class. I have nothing against wealthy people who earn their living honestly by providing good goods and services. If they're wealthy because they have the inside track to government money and they know how to work the inflation system or they get the contracts or part of the military-industrial complex, that is not fair and right. But the real tragedy is they end up getting the bailout. So the people who complain about Wall Street, they have something very correct about it, but they have to be careful not to condemn people who earn their living, but mainly if they're earning their living illegally. But it is true The transfer of wealth occurs, and now our middle class is shrinking. It's smaller now. We had the largest middle class ever in the history of mankind, and the wealthiest. And though we didn't have a perfect society, we certainly had one that was something to brag about. But people argue the case, well, America is, an exceptional nation. And we certainly have a history that reveals a lot of exceptionalism, and we do have exceptional values. But the one thing is those who use this argument about exceptionalism say that we are so exceptional, we are so perfect, and we know everything that we ought to go and force ourselves on everybody else around the world to live like we do, and that's what's wrong. But if we restore the republic, get a good, healthy economy, have some money, defend property rights, and have a foreign policy that defends this country and not to police the world, and we set a good example where there's a lot of prosperity, more than any other country have, why wouldn't that be the best way to spread our message? By setting a standard. Woo! Then other countries would want to emulate us. But the use of force, whether it's forcing other countries to do it or forcing individuals on their lifestyle and telling people what they should do, it just absolutely contradicts everything America stands for. But we are fortunate. We are fortunate because we at least have a tradition. I believe things are going to get worse economically. I worry about the attack on our civil liberties. I worry because we don't get a lot of national attention. I get reassured when I come out here because you know what I'm talking about. I'm very pleased when I hear the positive attitude. But we have to realize that, when push comes to shove, it could be a tough struggle. And that is why it's ideological, and it's not one party. When the revolution comes, and it's ideas of ideological revolution, it will be bipartisan. I remember very clearly back in 1971 when Nixon got us all the gold standard and did all those things. Then he said, well, we're all Keynesians now, and he was right. Republicans were no longer fighting for free markets. They all joined the Keynesian liberalism, inflationism, and Federal Reserve System type of programs. But when we replace that, it has to be pervasive. We have to have people come together from all parties. And this is the reason that I really am optimistic, because so many places where I go and the crowds are large, a lot of time people will come, but sometimes I even ask, there could be even some Democrats here. How do we know? But sometimes they'll whisper to me as they go out, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Democrat, but I'm going to register Republican to vote for you. I said, I always thank them and I appreciate it very much, but I tell them, just remember, all Republicans aren't the same. Be cautious. But no, and this is where the optimism should be. And we have a lot of great things going. We have an older population that knew something about these views and got disgusted and tired and dropped out because neither party gave them any answers. And now they're coming back into the fold. Some tell me they never got involved before. Some said I quit about 20 years ago. And now they're coming back because they remember a different time and they understand what I'm talking about. But what's really exciting is this next generation. This generation is coming alive now. They're all... Of course, there's a lot of stories written about that. Why should those young kids and young people be concerned? I said, well, their minds haven't been clouded up with a lot of stuff yet. They still have an open mind. They're idealistic. So, but it is great. I appreciate that very much. But I think it's coming together. It's bipartisan. It's ecumenical. But it is the key to it is like I explained. The key is freedom. But not be judgmental on how you use your freedom. That should bring everybody together for that issue alone. Freedom is a rather young idea. They accuse me, and I'm sure you've been accused of saying, "Oh, you just want to go back to the dark age, back to this silly idea of having commodity money and having a gold standard, and believing in the Constitution." That's all old stuff. But you know what is old stuff? Is tyranny. Freedom is new, and we've had this great experiment, but I get worried at times that it's slipping away. But I'm encouraged, of course, now because so many people are concerned and they're fighting the fight. But freedom has only been around, and the experiment, the evidence is so overwhelming. And even I tell people, and I'm very sincere about that, if I had a choice of living in a free society where my life was my own, but I would be poor, I would accept that. But the great thing is, the freer society, that doesn't happen. You know, we get a twofer. We get our freedom and we get our prosperity. But what happened, I think, you know, as we got wealthier after the Industrial Revolution, the material abundance was so immense that people were so pleased with it. That's what they concentrated on, and they got the government involved in helping to redistribute, and more people wanted more, and less people were concerned about the principles of liberty. But that's what's happening today. That's what the revolution is all about, is dealing with the principles of liberty, what made America great, and we will win this fight. Thank you very much.